In my previous stream, I was talking about a range of monotheists. Obviously, you can believe that there's only one God, but also argue that the one God you have in mind is not the Abrahamic God. I have met quite a few people like that, and the people who want to say they believe in God, which is not the Abrahamic God, would have similar reasons to Spinoza, the Jewish pantheist, who proposed the idea of a God who did create the universe, but who was indifferent to humanity. And we can guess at why he would want to create such a God, because he wanted to reject the Abrahamic God as a Jew, because he thought he would have more fun as a Gentile, or living as a Gentile. It has been said that Spinoza was the world's first secular Jew. And we can deduce from the kind of life he led and the kind of people who like what he said about there being a God, but not the Abrahamic God who gave us laws to follow, was that he liked the idea of believing in God, because he felt it was only logical that because there was a creation, there must have been a creator. And so the logic of that was inescapable, or he would have become an atheist. But he couldn't quite bring himself to believe that the God that created the universe was a God that gave us the Torah and the Koran. I mean, the motives are really quite obvious, really. People want to believe in God, or cannot escape from the logic of there having been a creator, because there was a creation. I mean, they could say that the universe was uncreated and was always here, but then they'd be faced with all kinds of inconvenient facts, such as the expanded universe, the Big Bang, which says that our universe is a living, changing one, and if there was a Big Bang, there might be a big crunch. And so the only way they can reconcile this, their acceptance of the logic of there having been a creator because there was a creation, could be to say, yes, we accept that because there was a creation, there must have been a creator, but we don't think it is the kind of God that the scriptures describe. And we can guess at the reasons. It is because they don't want to follow these laws. And we can understand in particular why a Jew might not want to follow these laws, because these laws for Jews are very harsh and means that they have to, live apart from Gentiles, they have to live amongst themselves, and maybe Baruch Spinoza didn't really fancy living his life as a Jew in his own community in Amsterdam, and so he thought he would break out of it. But in breaking out of it, he was accused of, heresy, for one thing, but it hasn't been explained or understood properly what kind of heresy it was. But I think idolatry would be, it is obvious to me anyway, from what I understand of Judaism, that denying God amounts to idolatry, because if you say God doesn't exist, then you would be following your own opinions about things. And if that is what you do, then you would be motivated to act according to your own feelings, and opinions. And therefore, if you could be said to worship any god in the sense that this idol would motivate your actions, it would be your own feelings and beliefs, even though they are wrong. So, technically an atheist is an idolater of himself. And we know the fate of Narcissus, who fell in love with himself after looking at a reflection of himself in the pond. So there is this presumption of self-harm through self-worship, because it has been said that pride is a deadly sin, and this means really that you will reject the authority and laws of God in order to indulge your own view of the world and how it should be. But returning to the topic of this title, I think you may be beginning to see why pantheists, if they were forced into a group, would not be winning any wars against Muslims. Because they already lack a scripture, and the reason why they became pantheists was because they didn't want a scripture, they didn't want a holy book to follow, and they preferred to follow their own inclinations. And if you put the lot of them together, they would just argue amongst themselves and probably kill each other. While Muslims would know that they have to obey God and follow his laws and organise to fight the pantheists and win. What about Muslims and Jews? Well, I think Muslims would easily win the propaganda war in the ways that I have previously suggested. So they would say, look, Jews, there's already so few of you. Why are we even having a war? And anyway, you could get to heaven more easily by becoming Muslim, assuming you believe in all, the afterlife and all that. And then the Jews who do believe in an afterlife would have to agree, because there's no way out, that becoming Muslim would get them to heaven more easily and avoid all the death penalties. And those who were secretly atheists would have to, well, what will they say? They'd probably say, well, then we have to go over to the pantheist camp, because we don't really believe and we don't really want to practice. We don't want to be restricted by all the restrictions of living as a Jew. And then they'd go over the pantheists, and the pantheists would lose the war. So that would be how I would resolve the situation between these different kinds of monotheists. Because really, Jews and Muslims, if they were following their religion properly, would be worshipping the same Abrahamic God. And those who worship the same Abrahamic God would have the benefit of the rule of law. And the rule of law is the desire to obey the law because it is a law, because it is felt by the individual that the law is from God and therefore should be followed because it is inherently good. So when people talk about the rule of law breaking down, what they mean is that, it doesn't have to mean that there's obviously chaos and anarchy in the streets and a civil war. It just means that eventually people will only obey the laws if they think they can get away with it. Well, in a society where most people did believe in God, they would be more likely to obey his laws. Because they wanted to anyway, not because they feared punishment. And such a society would be more socially cohesive, whose members would be kinder to each other, and there would be fewer social problems, and people behaving well towards each other. Well, in the group of pantheists, they would all be worshipping their own idol. And by that I mean worshipping their own egos, and their egos will always be in conflict with the egos of other narcissists, and soon there will be a bloody civil war. And this is kind of what's happening now in America and across the West. So that's all I wanted to say on the matter, just to continue my theme of the previous stream. Yes, I'm sorry you didn't receive a notification, but I guess if you do one after the other, something happens. Anyway, it's only a short stream. I hope it was reasonably clear. Thank you all for coming.